Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald! Timber!
From inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal. From inside the centre. I can't believe that.
Good time of day, everyone. You've heard from us a lot lately, which I think is good. If you don't think it's good, I don't know why you're listening. This is episode 178 of Americans Watching the Footy. I am your host, Ethan Castle, coming to you from my hotel room in Charlotte, North Carolina.
And I am Benjamin Castle, coming to you from my new place in San Diego. Well, less new than it was last time. I've been here for a grand total of 5 days now.
But yes, we're doing a couple of road episodes, at least I am. I need to make a map of all the weird places I've recorded from.
I remember a distinct Michigan saga.
Yes, and Ohio.
Yes, it exists. No, it is not a meme.
Again, Georgia's a funnier state. I think I had this discussion on air.
Florida as well.
Yeah. All right, so this is another progress report episode, but there are only 2 teams on buys. There are 2 that I definitely have a lot of opinions on, but with the smaller segment of buys this week, it's a chance for us to do one of my favorite things, ranking the 18 Sir Doug Nicholls Round jumpers.
And these are, of course, purely aesthetic rankings, all have great stories behind them, and we'll probably get into that a little bit. I made sure to include some things on the notes to help us along with that. Please, of course, forgive us for any pronunciation mistakes we make. It's only natural given our cultural separation.
Please note that we are actually trying.
Transliteration and just transcribing in general is always a slippery slope. We can even see it in how different Hebrew words and prayers are transliterated in different prayer books.
I pride myself and think of myself as someone who can pronounce things correctly usually. I do, however, struggle with Irish names. Have I mentioned this on air? I don't know. By the 178th episode, stuff blends in.
The only reason I'm good with some of the Irish names is just because I've heard enough people say it, because some of these names are names of classmates I've had, like Aoife and Siobhan and Yvine.
Yes, but also sometimes you have a name that's spelled like F-I-W-D-H, but it's pronounced Jimmy.
No, Ethan, that's Welsh.
It's both. All right, so the only 2 teams on bye this round are Fremantle and Port Adelaide, both currently in the 8. Both I enjoy talking about and enjoy watching, and if there's one thing that we can say people like about our show, it's that we usually spread things out among the 18 clubs pretty well.
I think that's just kind of natural for us coming from the outside perspective, that we don't have any sort of Victorian bias. Obviously, we'll have our biases toward our own clubs, West Coast.
Yes, we will talk about our own clubs more than any others. You're going to have to live with that, but we will not be talking about the big 4 Victorian clubs more than the out-of-state clubs. So in this week, with the buys being 2 out-of-state clubs, I don't think we're that much more knowledgeable about these clubs than we are about some of the others, but I think just compared to the lack of attention they get elsewhere, we are pretty knowledgeable.
Lack of attention paid to Freo in particular, that's actually where we're starting. I did the spinner already while we were talking. Technically we'll have to spin it twice just for the sake of spinning, but we'll start with Freo, who are 7-4-1, and in 6th, they got a massive percentage boost this past week, up to 121.4, as they draxed the Demons Sklounced.
Sklounced.
In Alice Springs. They now have the 2nd best percentage, actually.
Kind of hard to believe when you consider their losses to the Swans and Eagles, but yeah, they have the 2nd fewest points allowed by a considerable gap. At just 810, the only one better, unsurprisingly, is the Swans, who not only are at 754, but have done it in 1 fewer game. But this is a team that it's very hard to get to triple digits against. I think the Eagles are the only team to do it, if I'm not mistaken. When this team lost Western Derby, we were concerned. And the Dockers have really answered that call since then.
Alex Pierce has answered the call in defense. That's probably been the biggest thing there, is that he had a down few weeks and has since rebounded to be one of the most reliable one-on-one defenders in the league. And he's got plenty of movers around him as well. Luke Ryan tends to do the heavy lifting there. With Heath Chapman having come back recently, the movement has gotten even better as well, especially by hand.
Well, if you recall last year, Pierce was very poor except against Geelong. They won both games against the Cats. This year, he's played more like that in more games. And really, he had that little dip in production with the Western Derby around there. The other couple losses to Carlton and Port Adelaide, both games where they could have easily come away with points, and instead they had none out of those possible 8. But yeah, as Alex Pierce goes, largely these guys go. There are other players who are important. Getting good games out of Sam Switkowski, I think, just injects life into the whole team. And I think broadcasters are starting to realize how good he is and how much intensity and energy he plays with, both as a tackler and as an actual offensive weapon.
That was very noticeable in the middle quarters in Alice Springs in particular. I think his third quarter may have been the best or second best third quarter in the round this past week, maybe going along with Matt Rowell for the Suns. Switkowski and Frederick have always provided the midfield to half forward connection and speed. And shocker, both of them were in and played well. The team went up with them in that regard too. And of course, you've got the tall look where you've got these 3 players above 195 centimeters, so 6'5" or above, that can make this a very difficult team to match up against. Luke Jackson has obviously the ruck forward ability and did well enough in that matchup against Max Gawn this past week. Jai Amos regained his touch with 4 goals straight and literally threw away another one. He is only 20, by the way. He turns 21 at the end of July. Holy cow.
He looks like internet celebrity Daniel Larson.
Maybe some of you noticed the music in the background already. Kind of a deep cut question mark.
I hope we do have a few Larsonists in the audience.
I still prefer Josh.
Yeah, I do too.
And then also, we could talk about another Josh here in terms of the Cyclone, Josh Tracy, whose full field ability cannot be overstated.
How did he become the Cyclone? I might have asked this.
I guess after the actual Cyclone Tracy, which hit Darwin in 1974, it wrecked Darwin, in fact.
Ah,
makes sense then that Tracy had such an impact in the Northern Territory this past week.
I am pushing the sneaky Josh Tracy All-Australian campaign. I think there's a very good chance he at least gets into the extended squad. His marking ability, not just in the forward 50, but full field, you see it especially on the wings. Like, I think about the game Harrison Petty played against Geelong. Like that, but he's also kicking goals all the time.
Harrison Petty, yeah, that's not a name you really heard much this past week. I think he just had 2 touches. But we've seen more and more of these capable, versatile, tall players getting this time marking on the outside. You've seen it from Jeremy Cameron, Harry Mackay. He's more kind of center wing in that regard. But Cameron and Waterman also do a lot of it in the back half. And Tracy has started doing that as well, and I'm a huge fan of that. Just flexible, tall players in general are such an asset to any footy team. And I'm glad Justin Longmire has figured out how to use the talls and give them space.
The midfield for this team, no shock, it's Andrew Brayshaw, Caleb Sarong. But the biggest developer this year in a midfield role has definitely been Hayden Young, who I kind of describe as like the hinge man.
We'd seen a lot of it last year. We'd seen him start to have that tagging role, but now it's full-time midfield duty.
You will see him not necessarily like full switch where they completely reverse sides of the field, but the angle they're attacking at often changes through him. It might not be a drastic change. He's also usually on both the giving and receiving end of some of the longer kicks during their sequences, and honestly might be a reason that my prediction for Caleb Sarong Brownlow is in decline, because I think he's had a bunch of 3-vote worthy games. So has, if we drop back to the defense, Jordan Clark has just been tremendous, and he's really started racking up the coaches' votes. This guy's been on just an incredible run, not just with the speed, but he's moving the ball out of the back. This is a team that usually like shapes their whole attack, kind of like Luke Ryan does, but also he's present in a lot of the handball sequences. I mean, he's super fast.
His speed has always been on display. You saw it during his few years at Geelong. I think now we're seeing just the more complete part of his game. His handball numbers, I think, have gotten a slight tick up at this point, but it's the accuracy, it's getting the responsibility to actually be an impactful mover, whereas before it was just largely Luke Ryan directing all the traffic himself. He's deferred some of that responsibility to Clark, and it's gone amazingly well. Ethan, I'm just going to ask you real quick, how many Brownlow votes has Jordan Clark attained before this season?
If you're asking, it's very low. I'm going to say 1.
The answer is 1 from Frio's Round 17 2022 win against the Saints.
Luke Ryan, at times this year, has been really good. At times has been like high possession, somewhat low impact. I don't think he's ever been a negative impact. There are times when those sequences handling the ball around the back has just been there and hasn't really done anything. But there are also games where the whole attack has hinged on him. Like, I think about the round 1 win over the Lions in that regard for sure. And his fantasy value is insane. You know, for the last couple of years, people are usually looking at Rory Laird as number 1 pick in draft leagues, maybe Max Gawn. As of now, like heading into next season, we still got half of this year to go, but if you were to do a draft, you would probably be looking at either Gawn or Luke Ryan first overall.
I don't know how Max Gawn slid to number 12 in our draft, but I am very thankful that happened.
Negatives for this team, I think we've been pretty positive so far. There are times when they're just very, very low scoring and way too conservative.
Freezemantle went away for part of last year, and it's not fully back, but it's back enough that it can make this team just a slow and difficult watch. They have the ability to kick around the back for days, and they're patient in a way that you could tell is part of the Adam Simpson coaching tree. Sometimes it becomes too much, though.
Great things to do, like if you're protecting a lead late, but there are times when they just lean into it too much. Because this team does not need to be in super low scoring games all the time. They can run it up. There are moments where this team, you know, it feels like opponents are just comfortable with them playing their game, and
that's dangerous.
The Collingwood game, from the start of the third quarter until they started making that late comeback, I really felt that way.
This is a team, though, that has very good rebound ability. You look at how they demolished off turnovers this past Sunday in Alice Springs. They have the ability to move quickly. I think it's just a matter of their philosophy being, let's pick the spot to move quickly. And when we see it, we accelerate, because they can do it through the middle with the variety of midfielders they have. Young often spearheading that in the actual middle third of the ground. On the outside, Jeremy Sharp has been the perfect player for the role. And I think it's taken too long for a lot of teams to pay him the proper attention. Sharp has helped make up for the unfortunate absence of Nathan O'Driscoll. We still don't know what his prognosis is in terms of how long he'll be out. It may be the whole season, who knows. Things have been decently varied in terms of the small to middle forward crop. I'm actually even surprised by this in a very positive way. Third highest goal scorer for the Dockers this year on 14 is Bailey Banfield.
I'm not surprised by that. I just think he's a quality player. But it's been cool to see him just like quietly get a little bit better and establish some consistency. I think consistency was always the concern for his game, and I think he started to meet those concerns really well.
I also like that he and my sleeper pick Tom Emmett are not mutually exclusive. Emmett is a fresher forward about whom I learned near the back end of last year when he got his first game in. Mature ranger from South Australia who battled cancer and a severe Achilles injury to even get into the AFL in the first place. He did not play this past week, but has played each of their 11 prior games. Never a huge ball getter, averaging a little over 8 touches this year, but has been impactful enough in terms of pressure. And I would love for him to get upfield a little bit more, help out with some of that half forward flank. Maybe take a bit of the responsibility off Jeremy Sharp there. That would be nice. Oh, and Sharp was actually your sleeper. Nailed that.
Yeah.
He did not get a game last year.
But it seemed like, okay, it worked for that brief, I guess we can call it an insanity run for Will Brodie, who it's so forgettable now that I had to look at the roster to even remember which former Sun it was.
Another former Sun like Sharp. Sharp is averaging 19.5 touches a game so far.
As for Emmett, the only thing that could stop him is if they liked Sam Sturt enough to keep him in, which I'm up for. I like the way Sturt played this past week and would give him another go.
I also like the fact that they had Sturt in alongside Michael Walters, because oftentimes Sturt has been the guy to come in when they gave Sonny a rest. Now, obviously, we don't know how much longer Walters has. He is 33.
If we're going to talk about older guys, Nat Fife's been solid. I don't think he was their best player this week like Champion Data thought, but I think he's been just a quality midfield piece.
Well, I think Fife's impact has not been as important as of late because they've actually been giving Jager O'Meara full games. I don't know why at the start of the year they just kept putting O'Meara as the sub or putting him in and out whenever Fife was the opposite, but O'Meara's been on a tear in the past month.
The only two things that this team really needs to work out are figure out Sean Darcy's role. You'll notice this past week his time on ground was a bit lower and Luke Jackson got more of the ruck duty because Darcy is a good player. It's a question of, do you find a way for him and Jackson to coexist, or do you kind of dangle him as a trade piece this coming off season? See, that is one where the in-season trading would be fascinating. I think it would be pretty tough to trade Sean Darcy with his 6 years remaining. But the discussions would be fascinating.
He's got one of the longest contracts in the league at this point. Not many guys are signed into the 2030s. Couple were this week, though.
And then just like I touched on earlier, they need to be better at capitalizing on some of their stretches where they dominate possession. And I think really there's one clear team at the top. There's a couple of clear bottom feeders, but the difference between winning and losing in a lot of these games is just who's able to capitalize when they're dominant and not just kick through the big posts. It's a matter of having that attacking mindset. Their only loss in the last few weeks was a game that I think we can totally excuse. The Sydney game right after Cam McCarthy's death.
I'm still surprised that game was played.
Other than that, 2 very close games in South Australia and a Western Derby where they just kind of took a big poop.
There's one name that I'm surprised we have not mentioned at all.
Who?
Brennan Cox.
He's been out injured.
Yes, but I think that tells you how well the defense has gotten on even without him in. He was forward in his one appearance in round 1 before he got hurt.
He's listed as a forward on their roster.
I cannot see a spot for him in this current state.
I'd put him behind the guys who played this past week, plus Emmett.
I would put him in Peel Thunder.
And defensively, it's just like, who would you take out? I still think Carl Warner deserves another chance.
I probably would have put him in ahead of Corey Wagner.
That could happen. That's the only way I could see him getting in right now is if they put him back to defense and put him in over Corey Wagner.
Says good things about list development, that's for sure.
This is much closer to making last year look like an aberration and the optimism that I had for this team after 2022 being real.
This is not Flag Mantle, but it's Optimisticmantle.
I still maintain that they could have gotten way more for Akers and Chera, especially Akers. We were down on them entering this season after a pretty lackluster offseason. The forward group, it turns out, is just fine without Lockie Schultz. And Alex Pierce is reading on this. So
they don't miss Liam Henry either.
Yeah, which is funny because they really found a nice role for him towards the end of last year. I think that's also one where like the combination of Clark and Sharp has helped make up for his absence.
I think now's a good time, though, to look over at the Power, who defeated the Dockers in what round was that?
Round 5, I believe, because it was the week after the...
Gather round.
Ah, right. Because Freo stayed over and lost both of those games in SA. That was the one there. It was the Saturday night after.
Gather round.
I do want to mention one last Freo thing. He's out for the year with a knee injury. I've had a lot of optimism for him. I still do. Sebit Kuek. If you look on the roster, he's staring into your soul.
We've seen a few guys like that before, but that's a strong glare from Sebit. Do we have any like staring into soul type stuff on the port list?
Who was the one in prior years that I had mentioned for that?
The Crows, Tariq Newchurch.
Thank you. That's who it was.
We are probably the only footy podcast that has mentioned his name this week. I don't see anything super crazy there other than Dante Visitini's very long neck.
I've seen longer. So remember when AFL teams had like their little icon next to the hashtag, or some of them did? I wish some of them were doing that right now. Maybe they're saving it for finals.
Are you thinking that because of Port's shield in particular?
I am thinking that because what is Port's hashtag?
We are Port Adelaide.
Yes, and I think just the best way to describe them is they are Port Adelaide.
They are who we thought they were.
Like, my opinion about them has not changed one bit from where it was last year on a team scale. On an individual scale, a lot of positives.
I think both of our sleepers are trending quite well.
The thing is, team-wise, they're exactly where I was on them a year ago. Still haven't shown the ability to beat the best. Still pretty darn good at ganging up on teams beneath them. Prove something to me in September. They are 8-4. They are currently in 4th. They have the 6th best percentage at 111.7. And their luck in close games has actually largely kept up. 2-1 in really tight games. Or 3-1. Yeah, 3-1 because of the crazy win over Hawthorn.
Oh my goodness, that one just still boggles my mind as to how it actually happened, with the breakthrough coming so late after the Hawks had been able to lock down in defense for so long. It was not a game where even with a minute left, even with 40 seconds left, you thought, oh yeah, this needs a last 2 minutes video.
I guess let's talk about what's new first. After a lot of ruckman injuries, they have a totally new ruckman group led by Ivan Soldo, who has shown some use on other parts of the ground.
Jordan Sweet was able to fill in pretty nicely while Soldo was hurt, but Soldo is back, and that's a good thing. Dante Visitini got a couple games in as well and reminded us why Reece Stanley is probably on the way out at Geelong.
Yeah, I think that was much more Stanley bad than Visitini good. I mean, Visitini was definitely good, but I think it had more to do with Reece Stanley being bad.
Just going to remind you again, Dante Visitini has a brother named Vigo, who was drafted by Essendon. Some great names in this family.
Sticking with Essendon, they brought in Brandon Zerk-Thatcher, who I had said, great. He gets to play as a smaller defender now, and he's done a lot better against guys his own size.
He's more of the third tall option in a fully healthy team, I would say, behind Alir and another new guy. A guy who can bring a good amount of chaos there. A guy who, yeah, you could call it frostball-y, but Asava Radagolea is definitely his own thing. He's another one who's a genius because he's the one most like himself.
I think Asava Ball is its own category because it will often involve a bunch of really impressive displays of his physicality, but uncertainty kicking, whereas Frostball is like with supreme confidence. Asava Ball also includes misreading the goal line.
There was one time this year where he actually nailed it, and we were all
like
super surprised at happy.
The other negative can be there are some games where he gives away a shitload of frees, but he has been good. He has added a lot to this defensive hierarchy. When he and Alir are in sync, it's a really nice thing to watch. And what surprises me is that it's been Alir who's been the one that's kind of moved a little bit out of the back.
I mean, you'd be more confident with him doing it than Asava, obviously, and
I know it's just you think of Alir as such a mainstay in the back, and Alir still is the most important one to their defensive structure. Like in the blowout showdown loss, I know that was their forward inaccuracy in that game really gets highlighted, but there were a bunch of breakdowns and occasions where a Crows forward was able to get out the back, and that had everything to do with Alir not being there.
Yeah, he was concussed for that game. That is the only game he's missed thus far.
God, it's crazy to think the Swans let
him go, they let Jordan Dawson go, and they're in this shape still.
Jeez. In terms of players that are already there,
the Zach Butters Connor Rosie duo. When Rosie has been in, it's been highlighted every time. Butters, in terms of being a pure in the guts player, is up there as maybe one of the top 2 or 3 in the league. Going alongside those two, though,
Here he is again, the horny one.
Jason Horn-Francis has taken a step up this year in a massive way. It's allowed for Rosie to actually be a bit more flexible in his role.
It's pretty impressive that we can talk about this team's midfield, and the guy who won a Brownlow a couple years ago is 4th in the hierarchy, and they're just fine with that. I do like Ollie Wines. I know he's regressed some. I think he's been better this year than last. He's been in when that loss to Carlton this past week. I actually thought he was pretty solid, much more handball heavy, utilized his physicality well.
That's something that has been missing a little bit because he's been pushed to the outside a lot these past couple years. I remember his career arc kind of going wing to inside at a Brownlow and now just kind of outside mid to wing again. But I like him when he gets opportunities in the guts. I think you still need him there on ball, and then you can free up Rosie or Horn-Francis, depending on what you want in that moment. He's not one that you just relegate to the outside to preserve him at this point, like Travis Boak is, because, well, Boak is still a good field kick, even though I don't think he's kicked a goal this year. So I think it's, no goals 10 or no goals 11?
Yeah, Boak, I do still like the physicality. It's noticeable not just on the ground, but in marking contests, but he is definitely getting older. I think he's farther from retirement than a lot of people like to say.
Are you talking about him like playing 2 more years still up to age 37 or 38 and hitting 400?
I think it's not out of the question, so I'm not going to be that critical. I think a lot of people have talked like he's totally finished. I don't think he is yet. I think he's had some down games, but if he's your number 5 option in the midfield, you could do a lot worse. I want to talk more about that number 1 option, Butters, who kind of has an edge to him, I've noticed. Really likes to get under people's skin, can be a turd if you're playing against him. But at his best, I think there are only a couple other players whose best versions of themselves are better than his. We've seen Bontempelli at his best, Nick Dacos. I would put Butters right in past those two, maybe better than, or at least as good as, Cripps and Walsh at their best, or like a Tom Green or Cornelio. I think Zach Butters, when he's going along, is ridiculous. The physicality, the ability to play straight through the corridor, the impact he has right off of center bounces. I know Rosie's the captain, but I think at this point, Butters is the face of this team.
The heartbeat of the team. Captains and heartbeats can be different. Sometimes those heartbeats end up being vice captains, like Zach Butters, like Braden Maynard. But Butters is definitely that. I was just thinking about it quietly while you were talking about this. And yeah, I think I'd put Butters right there below Nick Dacos and Marcus Bontempelli. I'd put Butters above Isaac Heaney and Christian Petrarca at this point, which might sound crazy to a lot of people, but it doesn't to me.
And again, we're strictly talking about these guys when they're the absolute best, 100th percentile versions of themselves.
We're talking ceilings.
Forward group has been interesting. Charlie Dixon getting subbed out after 1 touch this past week is an unfortunate sign that he's aging. I still think he is useful structure-wise just because he's so big and can impact marking contests.
I think at this point, because you don't have to throw him in the ruck, Jeremy Finlayson is that most functional center key forward type.
The thing is, I think of a couple of the younger guys before I think of Finlayson. I think of Todd Marshall. I think of Mitch Georgiadis, who is totally back, and I'm very happy for him. I thought he was in danger of just getting squeezed out, but it's not too crowded with him in there.
I see those two as more pocket full forwards as opposed to center key forwards, goal square forwards. That's the role where I could see Finlayson working a bit better.
Well, I see Marshall he can mark anywhere.
Not the biggest guy, though, in terms of bulk. And he's had his concussion worries, which is why I'm not sure if I'd put him, and why I would not straight up put him as a goal square type. But he is their leading goal kicker for the year right now by 1 over Willie Rioli and by 2 over Georgiadis and Darcy Burn-Jones.
Wow, I can't think of Burn-Jones having all that many moments outside of the game winner against the Hawks. I think he's just been quietly consistent. Rioli,
he's had 2 streaks of 3 multi-goal games. That's what's been going on there. And Rioli had 4 in round 9 against Geelong and 3 in round 10 against Hawthorn.
Yeah, that game in round 9 where everyone just decided, he doesn't exist. You know how, is Diary of a Wimpy Kid a thing in Australia?
It's definitely an American cultural moment that has persisted. I'm amazed. When I was substitute teaching this past year, I would see kids with, book 16 or 17 or something in that series.
Wow. So we've got about 1 Wimpy Kid book for every 10. Now that's what I call musics.
the American versions, I think. Or are we talking the UK versions? There's both.
Oh, well, for that game, Willie Rioli was Chirag. You know, he was invisible. It's like everyone just pretending he doesn't exist, even though he's clearly right there.
The difference is I don't think Chirag had nearly as much of an impact on that story as Willie had.
Let's see, negatives for this team other than Dixon getting older. I think Lockie Jones has not been great.
He's been up and down, more up in the past couple weeks, especially as, you know, we thought we found a good replacement for him in Josh Sin, who finally got some opportunities, and then he broke his collarbone. He'll be out for another month or so. The other big negative in terms of injury is, of course, losing Sam Powell-Pepper to a torn ACL because he is just a ball of a player. Now, Rioli has done a good job to help make up for that in some respects. And on the taller side, the reemergence of Georgiadis has done a lot too. But you're still missing that just unabashed physicality that Powell-Pepper brings.
Oh, in terms of like forward 50 stuff, they've been just fine, but they do miss the Sam Powell-Pepperiness, some of the broken tackles and stuff. Someone needs to make like an avatar for him that's like, you know, those Reddit country balls? Like that, but it's bald and has a mustache.
And with Reddit incorporating like AFL jumpers and stuff, that would be kind of fitting.
Sleepers. Yeah, this episode, we really hit on both teams we're doing. Jackson Mead, who's kind of played a slightly ahead of center midfield role. If you averaged out his positioning and Kane Farrell's positioning, you'd probably end up right in the center circle. Has really come along as a secondary option. After about a month, he really clicked.
It's interesting. You finally talked about Farrell. I want to just mention how Kane Farrell and Dan Houston have just kept up with their long kicking and how a lot of teams have just paid them no mind. Look at what finally happened on Thursday when the Blues paid attention to them. It cut off a lot of their longer movement by just having Zach Williams and Lockie Fogarty focus so much on making sure those two weren't even available for overlaps. That was a great move by Michael Voss, and now I want to see if other coaches replicate it.
I guess while we're talking about those, I'll also mention, just because I always put him in that same sort of category with Farrell, Willem Drew on a lot of teams will be getting a lot more attention. He's a rock solid player. Just this midfield group is so sharp that he's kind of just down the pecking order in terms of guys we talk about, even though I have a very favorable opinion of him.
A favorable opinion of him as a tagger, a favorable opinion of him as just a pure center circle player. He's another one of those pieces outside of the main two or three who have been super important, and maybe he could help make up for some of the physicality lost by Powell-Pepper, even though they're very different players. My sleeper pick was Jace Burgoyne, who switched to his father Peter's number 7 this year and has looked the most consistent that he's been thus far in his 3 years in the AFL, getting some wing time, a lot at the half-back flank. He had a couple games, I'm thinking in particular of the game against the Dockers, and then also against the Saints round 7, where he was vital to so much of their movement. Career highs all across the board in that Saints game. Is able to pinch hit off stoppages as well. Had 5 clearances in that game. I think we're seeing a more versatile side of him this year, and we're seeing him be allowed to do more carrying the ball. Whereas maybe more of that responsibility might have gone to Kane Farrell in the past. Burgoyne has had a much more even share of things this year. That's done well.
He's been in more of an outside role. I think at times we've seen a bit less of the flash and flare, but he's just been a really solid overall piece.
I never really thought about the flash to his game. I thought about the level-headedness, and we've definitely seen that.
You know, Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did.
How did you know that number, Ethan?
Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters.
Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. No fancy software needed.
It's so easy you can edit it while drunk.
And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do.
Best of all, it's completely free.
Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint.
Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
A reminder that you can follow us on Twitter at Americans Footy to get our Australian rules thoughts all the time, anytime, and especially during games.
And also occasionally just random other stuff that I like to talk about that I think would be relevant.
May see us pay some more attention to cricket over these next few weeks as the T20 World Cup goes on, especially because it's at convenient times to us, considering we are in one of the host countries. You can find me individually on Twitter at BenjaminHK01.
You can find me at Castle Media. Brian Harambe, my son, is on Instagram at catnameDbrian.
He's finally started to like chicken. Took him long enough to come around to any sort of human food other than the salt on tortilla chips.
Sometimes the whole tortilla chip, not just the salt.
The salt is the reason, though. All right, it is time for our third annual Sir Doug Nicholls Jumper Rankings. So Ethan came up with this to just kind of do a whole ranking special on a couple things in 2022. And with only 2 teams on buys, it just seems like the right time to do this again. So we've gone through and individually ranked all 18 of them. There wasn't as much separation in general as we thought there would be, but we had to break a couple ties here and there. Again, we're not passing any judgment on the stories behind these jumpers and the artists themselves. These are all fabulous pieces in their own right, but in the end, we have our strong opinions about what looked good, especially in terms of how things were on the oval from a broadcast perspective. I think that's what's going to stand out for us most.
First off, American sports suck at specialty jerseys, whether it's City Connect, Nike garbage, or camo stuff for the troops. I have said during discussions about alternate uniforms and stuff that everyone needs to check out what the AFL does, because unlike American leagues, they get it right. And I think this year especially, there are fewer, I think, that absolutely blew me away this year than we've had some years. Like, they're all good. Nothing sucks. Even the ones that I ranked towards the bottom are still pretty solid. So nice work to all of these. And just, I love the way all of the different artists are included and celebrated, how much it means to the players who get involved with this. And I wish we did something like this, because the only sort of thing you ever see for like indigenous recognition on an American jersey is a few college football and basketball teams bringing in like a turquoise color.
In particular, the New Mexico schools and Florida State.
Oregon State's done it as well. But yeah, it's a special New Mexico thing.
So I think the appropriate way to do this is to go from the bottom up.
Yeah, so we, like you mentioned, we averaged out our rankings. I think all of these are better than the worst few of the last couple years, but there are some we like more than others. I will not be bothered if any team chooses to wear one of these later in the season. And I know a few teams do end up bringing them back at some point.
When NAIDOC week rolls around, it happens, and then various other occasions as well, like maybe if you're honoring an indigenous player, it will be a great time for it.
I always love seeing clubs bring out new ones each year, but if they want to run some of these back, I'm not going to be too upset. So let's start at the bottom with number 18, Collingwood, which was designed by Uncle Trevor Davis, who was the father of their cultural development manager and a 2-time All-Australian, Leon Davis. I think Collingwood maybe has the toughest challenge designing one of these each year, because their color scheme is just black and white, and it's just, the stripe pattern.
It's hard to figure out what to do with this pattern and this color scheme every time. You see it in the Anzac jumpers as well. They really stuck with keeping the stripes here and mostly added elements in the stripes itself. I was able to tell enough of a difference on the broadcast because of the additional details, but maybe not as much as most of the others.
Also, one of the details...
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about, Ethan. The Good Spirit Wirren.
Yes. Especially because of the black and white color scheme. Looks like Slender Man. My other knock on this one, some of the little piping, like this horizontal sort of stripe that cuts across the top around chest level and then around the back at the very top. It makes them look kind of like just like a practice jersey. I don't know how you improve because, again, this is a team in a tough spot with these. I think in the next couple of years, I'd love to see them try something like really adventurous just for once. And if it doesn't work, never speak of it again. And if it does work, make it a yearly thing.
Number 17, we have the Brisbane Lions. We had this one ranked pretty closely with Collingwood in all aspects. This was designed by one of Charlie Cameron's relatives, Renee Wilson. Her family is from Mornington Island. It was interesting to go with this white panel design to separate the past, present, and future. I think it was the past and future that were represented by the white panels, but the overwhelming thought for me was just, why can I see the player's lungs? It was like that, or like some sort of diptych or something like that. It's a cool art piece in itself, but there's an art piece and then there's something that translates well on a jumper, and it's sometimes hard to find that balance. You could still tell, though, always, this is clearly a Lions jumper.
I liked it more from a distance and up close, but I can't say when I see a uniform in any sport, I think of Alveoli. It also, just because of like the shape and some of the intricacies of the designs, kind of looks like a close-up of like, you know, a fly's wings. Number 16, we have the Gold Coast Suns. I put them at 15. Benjamin put them at 16. It averaged out to 16th. They had two different ones. The indigenous one, representing Gold Coast, was designed by Ugamba and Bunjalung artists Christine and Kyle Slab, and their Darwin one, which I liked much more and had a serpent on the front, was by Larakia man Trent Lee. I do like the idea of like the concentric circles and stuff that was on the Gold Coast one. The issue with it was that the circles on the back made the numbers a bit hard to read.
That was the big complaint there. It was like just one main design element, but I would have loved to have seen more light blue break it up. I think that's something that I want in general in terms of Gold Coast jumpers. I just think it's time for a full rebrand for them in the first place. And when they do that, I want to see more light blue present in all their jumpers. And it really would help with some of the contrast here. I like that it was there in the rainbow snake, but I left the games in which the Suns were wearing these just kind of wanting more out of both designs. Like good bases, but I wish more steps had been taken.
Number 15,
which we both ranked just above the Suns. We have Geelong, designed by Karai Warung and Yorta Yorta artist Sherry Johnstone. There were two versions of this one, a white and a navy blue. The dark version works a lot better in terms of actually incorporating the main design element, which was kind of this trapezoid that took up much of the torso of the player. It's an interesting look. You had a couple teams go with these sort of panel options, and I think Geelong's worked better. I also like that the design continued onto the sleeves in the same way. The long sleeve jumpers tend to be things of beauty. I'm thinking back to Melbourne and Narms from a few years ago as one of those great examples.
I actually liked the white one better than the blue one. If we're going off of the team's performance, the team liked the white one better than the blue one, not that they performed well in either game. But you compared it to kind of looking like an apron. I thought it kind of looked like an old-timey bathing suit, like something you'd wear, you know, when you're doing like a Jack LaLanne workout. But it grew on me. This definitely grew on me over time. I think the past couple of years were better, but I have a better opinion of this one now than I did when it was first released. At number 14, Fremantle or Wallula, designed by Daniel McHenry, the cousin of Freo veteran and Indigenous liaison Michael Johnson. I gotta say, this one I was much more excited about when it first dropped than how it actually ended up looking on the oval. I love the incorporation of the green and red, you know, kind of the Italian flag thingy, is how I like to describe it. That was on, you know, this team's like original jumpers. Unfortunately, on the oval, it was much more just the purple and red blending together, kind of giving off like Toronto Raptors 90s and 2000s vibes.
I mean, that's not a bad thing, but we're not supposed to be thinking about Chris Bosh and Vince Carter and T-Mac. I wish there were more green on this jumper in general, and I prefer the white version. I actually had this ranked significantly higher than you. You had it number 16, so third worst. I had it up at number 10, right in the middle. I think the white version might have ended up actually in my top half. I love how the boomerang and spears were used to call back to the anchor. That was the main design element of their first jumpers. And I think that there's something that can be done with that, maybe replicating that in the future, just with maybe some cleaner color blocking.
Agreed.
And more of a red and green balance.
Yes, that was the biggest disappointment to me. I think the red overpowered the green. Number 13, the Western Bulldogs, designed by Tarni Jarvis, who also designed Collingwood's last year. Tarni is Job Warong, Kirai Warong, and Peak Warong woman. On TV, you couldn't quite tell the difference between it and the normal ones as much, but in photos and up close, I think this one looked awesome. It's just the best of these are the ones that you can tell from a distance and up close. You can tell what team it is, but also that it's a different design. I think right around this spot is where we're entering the tier of the pretty darn good ones.
I was a fan of this one. I like how this one and a couple others really made sure to emphasize design elements on the lower part of the jumper going down to the waist, which is something that's often overlooked in jersey design in general. I wish more had been done in the upper half, though, to differentiate it from the typical Bulldogs jumper. At number 12, we've got Greater Western Sydney, designed by Gomeroi artist Caleb Waters. They've gone with a white jumper in the past few years with a lot of orange elements. This time it was a charcoal jumper, and I wasn't sure how well that would work, but it did translate well on the field. The orange details did stand out, and the stylized kangaroo that was fit into the letter G helped keep the jumper very clearly GWS. You couldn't mistake this for another club's jumper for a variety of reasons, and that's always a plus.
I did like, though, that you could tell that it was different. I liked the intricacies on the display up close, and it was clear from up close and afar that it was still GWS, but also that it was different. So it fit all the requirements. A different shade of gray as the dominant color would have done it for me.
I don't know, maybe a larger letter G as well. We've seen a larger letter G on some of the other jumpers in the past. You've been able to fit in more there and break up the colors a bit more that way. Thinking about the one Bobby Hill designed a couple of years back.
At number 11, Port Adelaide, or Yardapulti, designed by Byron Pickett, the 2004 Norm Smith medalist. He was also a member of the Indigenous Team of the Century, as well as his cousin Melanie Pickett. This one was not a huge jump from the previous year's designs, and I liked it better up close than from a distance. I would have liked to see more of the teal in it. I think up close, the little teal accents look awesome. I think from a distance, they get lost.
That's a complaint that I think we've had over the past 3 years with their jumpers. Thinking back to, I think, 2022 with the one that Lockie Jones designed. Kind of sparse black jumpers. I mean, I get that there isn't a whole lot of detail in what Port has to begin with, but just separating out the colors would help a lot, especially because the three colors that they do have in their jumpers work really, really well together. And I'm not just saying this because we are San Jose Sharks fans. At number 10, NARM, Melbourne. I'm surprised that this one finds itself as low as it does. I think this right here is where we start getting into like the really good stuff. We wouldn't mind if any of these returned for next year. This one was designed by Molly Isabel, a South Australian artist of Arabana and Kolkata origin, and it was inspired by her brother, I believe, and him getting a heart transplant. This was another one that had two versions, and I prefer the light blue version. All the details on it stand out more, the kind of watery nature. It's tough for the Demons to do something completely different. They did it a couple years ago, but this was one that kept the red triangle, and as a result, maybe could get kind of lost in the mix for some people.
I like the heart concept. I just wish the design itself, like, the shoulder yoke or something, was a little bit different. I think this is another one that from a distance, you can't really tell that there's much of a difference.
Number 9.
West Coast, or Walaj Marawar, designed by Yamachi woman Loretta Egan, influenced by two-time Premiership player and Indigenous Team of the Century member Chris Lewis. I had this one up at number 7. You had it down at number 11. I am not normally a fan of gradient designs in uniforms, but this one actually worked. I did think the hyper-realistic eagle was a little bit off-putting, though.
It was definitely different, and I think actually most people on the poll on the AFL website actually said this was their favorite. This got about 20% of the vote, and it was pretty spread out otherwise. I like the primarily gold approach, though I wish there was more blue on the sleeves and maybe the eagle tracks. I also don't mind the gradient on the eagle hat. I was just expecting and maybe wanting something more stylistic. I also am very, very fond of the one that they did last year, which was the royal blue jumper with the full body eagle. Also, just you'll notice that one of the things that I really like is full body animals on there, particularly birds. It just looks really, really good. And that takes us perfectly into number 8, Hawthorns, the Chance Bateman inspired piece by Jade Dolman. Now, Dolman and Bateman share a Ballardung heritage, and there's a lot of influence of Ballardung art and land on this jumper. Again, points for the full body hawk, and I preferred the gold jumper to the brown one here.
Yeah, I think I did as well. I was not a fan of totally deviating from the stripes. I would love to keep some vertical stripe element, but this is still very clearly a Hawthorn jumper, and that is a tough color scheme to work with, and they made it work.
Hawthorn is a team that doesn't miss in these sorts of jumper designs. I think, last year's was the one. I think we ranked that actually number 1. That was on with another full body hawk going the full width. I believe Jarman Impey was part of that design team for that one. And this year they honored Impey by officially making him their captain for the 2 rounds.
At number 7, Euroke, St. Kilda, designed by Wagaman man Nathan Patterson. Simple does it here. Last year's was a winner, and so is this one. They really didn't need to change much. I think they could do a couple more years with designs like these before switching anything up. I liked also that they had a predominantly white one against Melbourne or Narm. That I think that's an inspiration for a class jumper in the future.
It calls back a little bit to their old candy stripes, and they did bring that back, I believe, for the Gather Round. So there's that. I actually prefer the white version to the gold version because the details within the stripes stand out more on a white background. I would not mind if this one stuck around at all. Up at number 6, this is another one with just a tough design task with such a simple color palette. It's the Blues, designed by Zach Williams' cousin Stuart James, who is a Wiradjuri man of the Narradarabara River people. Over the past few years, we've seen the Blues sometimes do multi-tone stuff with blue. This one, they stuck to their 2 main colors and faded out the design a little bit around the Carlton crest. And damn, this works. The design around the waist is very visible. There's some striping up around the shoulders that keeps it unique as well. This is fantastic given the inherent limitations that the Blues have in their designs.
If Carlton fans want to lord something over Collingwood, they can say that they make more out of a limited color scheme for Sir Doug Nicholls Round than the Pies have been able to.
Yeah, so 2022 and 2023, looking back at both of them, those had a lot more with multiple tones of blue, with royal blue. Carlton has more at their disposal here than a lot of people think. I'm wondering if Collingwood maybe should try to incorporate some silver in their next design and just kind of go with some more along the black-white gradient. And I think still we're stepping up a tier as we get into the top 5. These are ones that I would say I would instantly buy if I were a fan of these clubs.
Shut up and take my money.
At number 5, we both put at number 5 Richmond, designed by Morris Rioli Jr. and his mother, a Tiwi woman, Alberta Karinawia. The 2 family totems, the turtle and the crocodile on this one, were really neat. My biggest complaint is that they didn't wear it the round before at the Gabba.
I didn't understand that, especially when there would have been enough of a clash with the Lions one, considering the white panels on the front of Brisbane's. Maybe Richmond were just trying to save it for Dreamtime, but they were the only club that round that did not wear one of their specialty jumpers. With Richmond, you can do so much around the sash, and I think this is the best treatment of the sash that I've seen yet. It stands out from their regular jumper because of it, and there are also some details that are easier to see up close. There's a little bit of shading around the sash. There are some spears on the back. This doesn't try to do too much, but it takes advantage of the main design element that's already there, and it maximizes that. That is a great design approach.
Since they only wore this once, I really hope they bring this one out for a second game this year. They have no reason not to. This thing's awesome.
Speaking of sashes, and speaking of Dreamtime, at number 4, we've got Russalina Purantata-Mary's design for Essendon. She also designed Geelong's 2023 jumper, and I think this is a step up. We weren't sure how this was going to go with the red and black that were dappled in the main body of the jumper. We thought it might look too maroon, but no, you could still tell this was clearly Essendon red on the field, and it still emphasized the sash while incorporating all sorts of Tiwi elements.
This, I think, was the best result in terms of expectation versus reality. I love how this came out, and again, I was pretty skeptical at first. Love how it ended up.
I think this could be a really good inspiration for future red clash designs, because the big issue with Essendon and red jumpers is still figuring out how to deal with the red sash requirement. I don't think their red clash this year does a great job with it, with what just reminds me of like tire tracks or a curve on a railroad. Something like this where you mess with the shading a little bit, I think would be the best solution.
I was not expecting to love this one as much as I did, even though they kind of got the shape of the Tiwi Islands upside down.
They recognized it before they wore it or mailed it out. We've reached the podium.
All right, at number 3, Adelaide or Kawarna, designed by Isaac Rankin and his cousin Harley Hall. I wasn't so sure about the asymmetrical design at first, but loved the full body crow. This is a winner. I don't think they've ever worn a bad uniform. I think they made a mistake with the choice of which one they wore against Hawthorn this past week. Probably should have worn the one from Gather Round or just their regular one instead. But that's the worst crime against uniforms they've ever committed.
This rivals Pat Caruso's jumper from 2 years ago, which is not something I thought I would have said at all. But obviously for me, points for the full body crow. The red to yellow gradient works perfectly just within the crow's color scheme. And it also adds up just to form this traditional guard Jerry nighttime scene. And that's icing on the cake for what is a design that has just enough detail in the main part of the jumper to really stand out and be a clean look overall. At number 2, we welcomed back the Black Swan, thanks to Richard Campbell, who is the uncle of former Swans player James Bell. I actually did not know that connection there, but Sydney went back to the Black Swan after a couple years away. They also inverted the red and white from their typical jumper, and so that made it stand out even more. Is it as good as the original Black Swan look? I still don't think so. I think that is very, very favorite Indigenous jumper for me alongside Hawthorn's from last year, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, I think I like it better without the colors being inverted, but this one is so good. Should have never gone away from the Black Swan. It is iconic. It is an institution, and it should stay forever.
If I had one small gripe about it, the top circles, there are these 4 circles, and the top ones are cut into a little bit by kind of the negative space of the Opera House design. That's like my one issue here. I am just happy that the Black Swan is back overall.
Should have never left us. Glad it's back. And at number 1, so you know how Geelong is kind of like best Mad Monday every year? I think it's fair to say North Melbourne is best Sir Doug Nicholls Round jumper almost every year, or at least in the top tier.
We had them as number 1 a couple years ago as well. It's a similar design here compared to 2022, but I think this one is even better.
This one was designed by Wemba Gundichmara Ngajanji and Tongarong woman Emma Bamblett, and this one checks off every box in what I want to see in a Sir Doug Nicholls Round jumper. It is clearly different from a traditional North Melbourne jumper, but it still maintains the striping pattern and incorporates kangaroos. It is visibly different from both afar and up close from the standard North Melbourne jumper, but you can still easily identify that it definitely is North Melbourne. If every team applies this sort of method to their design, these sort of principles, they will have winners every year. Great work. Really can't complain about this one at all.
And I loved Kaya Nicholson Ward's design from North from a couple years ago. I think she also did NARMS that year as well. I think this one is even better than that because it sticks just with the white and shades of blue. There's no black at all in this. It's just pure North colors. The details within the striping are a plus and they're distributed really well. The very pale blue, instead of just having the stripes being white, makes this clearly different. This is up there on my podium of favorite Sir Doug Nicholls Round jumpers that I've ever seen. along with the original Black Swan and Jarman and Bee's design last year. And it's going to be hard for other designs to breach that podium.
I want every club, when they're designing theirs, to look at this and use it as inspiration.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, and whatever else you want to call yourselves, because that's okay, is our third annual Sir Doug Nicholls Round jumper ranking. Again, this is the best crop we've had yet, and we're looking forward to it hopefully being even better next year. I hope the clubs that know how to make these designs well keep following the same principles, and I hope some others get inspired.
And most of all, I hope that our American leagues can take some notes on how to do specialty uniforms from this. Because even the ones that I put at the bottom tiers for this were still pretty dang good.
Oh, they would kick ass compared to almost all of the American specialty stuff. We're blown away here in America when we even sometimes have like different languages on jerseys, and that's it. And I'm not just talking about like El Heat or Los Suns. I'm thinking back to, for example, how the Milwaukee Brewers completely changed their word mark for a couple of them. I love their old gold Cerveceros jersey for Hispanic Heritage Night, and I hope they bring that back in their new template.
I like the Polish one.
Oh yeah, it actually had like red striping on it. See, the Brewers are a team that does it right, but can still do more. Everyone can follow this lead that Australian teams have.
Can we have one with an Amharic script?
Who would do Ethiopian Heritage Night?
Good question, actually. So with that, we're gonna fade off into the ether. I think that's a term. I don't know. I'm gonna steal this line from a radio show I used to listen to. Might have used it before. I'm gonna go patrol the streets looking for crime. Not gonna do anything about it. Just look for it.
That's the Tony Bruno line, isn't it?
Yes.
Did we learn that from the Madden games?
No, I just learned it from his actual show.
Because I remember he did stuff in the Madden games as well. He is at Castle Media. His cat is at Cat Named Grind on Instagram. I'm at BenjaminHK01. We are all at Americans Footy, and the next time you hear from us will be for the Round 13 recap, and that'll probably be recorded straight after the Kings' birthday game. So hopefully we got a good game to lead us into that and get us inspired.